Good afternoon. My name is Tim Lynch. I am your host for Legal Lines. Legal Lines is brought to you by the Massachusetts LGBTQ Bar Association. If you'd like to call in, please feel free to do so. Our number here is 617-708-3290. Again, 617-708-3290. We have a fascinating show for you here today. My guest is Andrew Musgrave. He is the Director of Legal Services for AIDS Action. Andy, how are you? It's good to see you.
Very good to see you. Thank you very much for having me on today.
Well, why don't you give us some background? Tell us, what is AIDS Action?
So AIDS Action is the largest AIDS service organization in New England. We've been around for over 25 years, and we have multiple locations throughout the greater Boston area, both in Jamaica Plain, in Cambridge, also in Lynn, and we also have some outreach centers such as in the South End at the Mail Center. And we provide social services to people who are HIV positive, and that takes the form of case management services, mental health clinicians, nutrition programs, outreach and prevention programs, and also legal services.
That's great. And I have to say, I was telling you before the show began, I remember being in Boston in the 80s and with rampant discrimination against gay people. And the one thing I remember is AIDS Action being formed, and not only being formed, but making it a point that they don't discriminate against anyone.
No, we're accepting of anyone who's willing to walk into our doors or meet us out in the streets wherever we are. We've always taken great pride in reaching all members of the community wherever they may be, trying to be as open and welcoming to all people.
Yeah, and you know, and given the background, I think that speaks so well for you and for the community. What generally types of legal issues do people with HIV face?
Well, basically, I'd say there's two areas of cases that we deal with, and those are, the first set are cases where someone's HIV status is the central issue in the case. So those tend to be discrimination cases. That can involve someone facing discrimination in their attempt to get housing or stay housed, or in their employment or another area. It also can involve a disability case with Social Security, or a matter in their ability to gain access to health care or assistance for health care. So whether it's being approved for one of the various drug assistance programs that exist, or getting a medical procedure approved and paid for by Medicare. So that's one type of cases. The other large segment that we deal with are the type of cases where HIV may not be the central issue in the case, but it is either a secondary issue, or the case would have a large impact on their health, such as an eviction case. And so where maybe their HIV status is not the central issue in the case, it plays large in the legal issues that they face.
Plays large in the legal issues they face because they're more fragile, or how so?
So it can play in a couple different ways, but one of the largest areas is the impact that it's going to have on someone's health. So take for example an eviction case. There's numerous data and studies showing that homelessness will have a tragic impact on someone's health. However, when you look at the impact of homelessness on someone's HIV positive, that impact is exponentially expanded. And you're taking someone who they no longer are able to keep their HIV medication in their medicine cabinet because they don't have one. If they're trying to stay current with all of their appointments for their doctors, they don't have a calendar in their kitchen anymore to write down all their appointments. And if you're someone who has a weakened immune system and you're not able to keep up with your medical regimen, and you're forced to go into a shelter where you're sharing a room with 100 other individuals who are also spending their days and some of their nights on the streets, and thus have various illnesses such as pneumonia and bronchitis and other problems, that you now are your risk of infection and getting disease is heightened greatly. So the impact on someone of eviction on somebody who's HIV positive can just be devastating.
It sounds horrible. How often do you see cases like that?
We see cases quite frequently with clients who are facing eviction. Their housing is probably the largest chunk of or area of law that we cover, and thankfully we tend to be quite successful in working with clients, both in resolving issues with landlords. Also, our organization is able to provide financial assistance. So if someone has had tough times, if they've lost their job, or their hours have been cut back, we are able oftentimes to provide financial assistance to the client as well, to give them a period of time to get back on their feet, so that they can remain housed going forward.
And have you faced cases with discrimination in housing?
Yes, it's shocking to see that it occurs, but I think oftentimes people believe that we've left behind the times when discrimination was so rampant. And I think that we have moved it past a time where people in the 1980s might feel comfortable publicly stating that they didn't want to live next to someone who was HIV positive, they didn't want to work with someone who was HIV positive, they didn't want to be in the same school or neighborhood with someone who was HIV positive. Where nowadays you won't have such blatant statements, but maybe your landlord who used to invite you to his summertime barbecues in the backyard, when he didn't know your status, if you either somehow became aware of it, all of a sudden he's much chillier to you. And then before, where maybe if you were behind in rent 1 month, he'd say, don't worry about it, you've been a good tenant for the last 5 years, I know you're good for it, you'll make it up. This time you're late a few days and you're getting a 14-day notice to quit handed to you. Or you're working in a job, and before your boss was the one who would come to you and seek you out to take on the big project, now all of a sudden he's going to your coworkers and you feel you're frozen out. So it is not as blatant or as in your face as it was before, but we still see it on a regular basis.
And these fears are irrational, obviously. I mean,
Completely.
It's very hard to get HIV.
It is. I mean, and especially in the ways that people will react, or what you would assume their underlying fear is based on their action is completely irrational. So you'll have someone who no longer wants to be in a close physical proximity with someone who has HIV. Someone doesn't want to shake a hand or share a soda, which that is not. You are not going to be contracting HIV in any shape or form if those are your interactions, unless you are, to put it bluntly, unless you are exchanging fluids with someone, bodily fluids with someone, you are not going to be getting HIV. You're not shaking someone's hand, sharing a soda with them. You're not going to be contracting HIV.
And the other cases you mentioned were employment discrimination. You're still seeing employment discrimination?
We do. It's a very sad thing to see, but we still see people who, when their employer becomes aware that they're HIV positive, the attitude will greatly shift. As I said before, it will not be as blatant, oftentimes because employers may be aware that it is not, it is illegal to discriminate against someone who's HIV positive. But they'll slowly be frozen out of assignments. We've seen what normally would be routinely handled internally in say regards to someone is late for work. Mm-hmm. Normally, maybe someone was 15 minutes late. What normally would just be not even mentioned at all because the person's done a great job. All of a sudden, that person's going to be written up. And then, they begin looking for the smallest infraction possible to find a way to terminate the person.
Wow. It's surprising you still see cases like that this day and age. What about people because people with HIV have a compromised immune system. What if they're having health issues, and how does that affect their employment? And do you get involved in cases like that?
We do actually quite frequently. And under the American with Disabilities Act, people who are HIV positive have great protections. So first off, people who are HIV positive are considered disabled under the American with Disabilities Act. Even if you're someone who is able to continually work, you still are considered disabled, and you are able to enjoy the benefits of the American with Disabilities Act. And what that act says is that if you do have a disability, but you're still able to do what are called the essential functions of your job, but you need what is called a reasonable accommodation. So say you're someone who you frequently, as a result of your medication, have nausea in the morning. So getting into work at 8:30 every morning is difficult for you. However, by 9:15, that nausea has passed and you're ready to function, you're able to do your job, and you're able to perform all the function the job require. Well, if your job is in an office, and it makes no difference of whether you're there at 8:30 or 9:15 or 9:30, that's just the normal procedure is that they start at 8:30. Then under the law, you can request that your employer, as with a letter from your doctor, you can request that they grant you an accommodation and allow you to come in at 9:30. That way you're not dealing with the nausea, you're no longer going to be late for work. You come in at 9:30, and now, before maybe when you left at 4:30, now you leave at 5:30. And these are very simple adjustments to someone's work that can allow a person to stay employed and allow the employer to have a productive employee, where previously they may have been in a situation of having continued infractions in violation of their handbook.
So in cases like that, they usually, once you get involved, they usually resolve through negotiation, or do you have to actually go and bring a suit?
So in the vast majority of times, we're able to resolve this with negotiations. That most employers are aware of the laws. If they're not, once they get a letter from an attorney, they will contact their attorney, who will quickly set them straight on what the law is. And in these circumstances, I mean, normally you're dealing with an employee who's been working somewhere for a while. You can show that they've had a good track record. But most times that once the employer gets their attorney involved and they realize what the law is, and they understand that what we're asking for is reasonable. There's no undue burden upon them. We're not asking them to move a mountain here. We're just asking somebody to, yes, you're going to treat this person slightly differently, but they're still going to perform the wonderful job that they've been doing for you all this time.
Yeah, negotiation should be a win-win.
Yeah, exactly. Everybody benefits. The employer still gets the great production that employee has been producing for them, and the employee gets to continue to do the job that they enjoy.
So another area I was curious about was life insurance. Did you get involved in that at all?
Well, we often do advise people. It's one of the most common questions that we have from clients is, they're looking at their situation. They want to be able to provide for their family when they pass on. They also don't want their funeral expenses to be a burden upon their family. So it's a frequent question we get, and unfortunately, there's not a good answer for clients. So